They said it with such casual cruelty, like stating the weather. "You're a complete failure, Maya. Face it." My brother David's words hung in the air above the dinner table while everyone else focused intently on their plates. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what happened next turned that humiliation into the sweetest victory I'd ever tasted. Because 3 hours later, his boss would be calling me Madam CEO, and watching David's face drain of all color. My name is Maya Chen, and I've spent the last 15 years building something extraordinary, while my family dismissed me as the black sheep who couldn't get her life together. That October evening started like every other monthly family dinner at my mother's house in Riverside. The same mahogany table, the same passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern, and the same script where I played the role of disappointment. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a bottle of expensive wine that no one would acknowledge, and wearing a simple black dress that my sister-in-law Jessica would inevitably critique. The house smelled like my mother's famous pot roast, a scent that used to comfort me but now felt suffocating. Everyone was already seated when I walked into the dining room. Mom at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly styled despite claiming she'd been cooking all day. Dad to her right, scrolling through his phone and barely looking up. David across from him, 34 years old and still acting like he was the golden child, with Jessica beside him, her manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. The only empty chair was at the far end, facing everyone like I was on trial. Again. "Maya, sweetie, you look tired," Mom said, which was her way of saying I looked terrible without actually saying it. "Are you getting enough sleep? You know stress shows on your face." I smiled and took my seat. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with work." "Work?" Jessica repeated with that little laugh she did, the one that made everything sound like a joke. "Still doing that consulting thing?" That consulting thing. As if the business I'd built from nothing was some kind of hobby. "Yes, still doing that consulting thing." David leaned back in his chair, already reaching for his second beer. He worked in sales for a mid-sized tech company, the kind of job that came with a decent salary and benefits but required him to kiss up to executives all day. He'd been there for 8 years, climbing slowly through middle management while complaining about every promotion that passed him by. "You know, Maya," he said, wiping foam from his lips, "at some point you have to face reality. This whole entrepreneur thing isn't working out. You've been struggling for what, 10 years now?" 15, I corrected quietly. 15 years, he repeated, shaking his head. "And what do you have to show for it? You're still renting that tiny apartment, driving that old Honda, wearing the same clothes you had in college. Meanwhile, Jess and I just put an offer on a house in Westfield. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, 2-car garage." Jessica beamed like she'd personally built the house with her bare hands. "The kitchen has granite countertops and a breakfast nook. Maya, you should come see it once we close. Maybe it'll inspire you to set some real goals." I nodded and sipped my wine, the same expensive bottle they were all enjoying while criticizing my life choices. The irony wasn't lost on me, but pointing it out would only make things worse. Dad finally looked up from his phone. "Your brother has a point, sweetheart. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable. My buddy Frank is looking for an office manager at his insurance company. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work with good benefits." "Office manager," I repeated, trying to keep my voice level. "There's no shame in it," Mom added quickly. "Not everyone is cut out for business ownership. It takes a special kind of person, and there's nothing wrong with admitting it's not for you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The conversation continued around me, everyone offering their unsolicited advice about my career, my life, my future. David talked about his latest promotion to senior account manager like he'd been elected president. Jessica discussed her part-time marketing job at a local boutique like she was running a Fortune 500 company. They dissected my failures, real and imagined, with the enthusiasm of sports commentators. I sat there, cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, remembering every family dinner over the past 15 years. The questions about when I'd get a real job. The jokes about my little business. The concerned looks when I couldn't afford to split expensive restaurant bills, or contribute as much to group gifts. The way they talked around me when discussing family finances, as if I had nothing valuable to contribute to the conversation. They had no idea that my little business had evolved far beyond consulting. What started as freelance marketing advice had grown into something much bigger. I'd spent years building relationships, studying markets, identifying opportunities that others missed. 5 years ago, I'd quietly started acquiring small companies that were struggling but had potential. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make headlines. Just solid businesses that needed better management and strategic direction. I owned a chain of boutique fitness studios that were thriving in the post-pandemic wellness boom. I had controlling interests in 2 successful food trucks that had expanded into brick-and-mortar restaurants. My portfolio included a sustainable clothing brand that was getting attention from major retailers, and a tech startup that had just landed its first major client. But I kept everything under the radar, operating through a holding company that few people knew I controlled. The family saw what I wanted them to see. The old Honda that was actually paid off and ran perfectly. The small apartment that I owned outright and used as a tax write-off. The simple clothes that were actually carefully chosen pieces from sustainable brands I believed in. They saw struggle where there was strategy, failure where there was careful growth. The thing is, David continued, now on his 3rd beer and getting louder, Maya always thought she was smarter than everyone else. Even in high school, she had these big plans and ideas. But look where it got her. David, Mom said with a weak protest, but she didn't really mean it. No, it needs to be said, he insisted, pointing his beer bottle at me. Someone needs to give her a reality check. Maya, you're 32 years old. You have no husband, no kids, no house, no savings that anyone can see. You show up here every month with expensive wine like you're doing great, but we all know you're barely getting by. Jessica nodded along. It's actually kind of sad when you think about it. All that time wasted chasing some impossible dream instead of building a real life. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my fork against the plate. I could feel them all watching me, waiting for my reaction. This was the moment they'd been building toward all evening, maybe for years. The intervention. The tough love. The moment when they'd finally broken through my stubborn pride and made me admit defeat. I looked up from my plate and met David's eyes. He had that satisfied expression he used to get when we were kids, and he'd successfully gotten me in trouble. The look of someone who thought he'd won. You're right, I said calmly, setting down my fork. I am a complete failure. The words hung in the air, and I could see the mixture of surprise and satisfaction on their faces. They'd expected me to fight back, to defend myself, to make excuses. Instead, I'd given them exactly what they wanted to hear. I'm glad you can finally admit it, David said, leaning back with a smug smile. That's the first step to making better choices. I nodded and reached for my purse. You know what? You're absolutely right. I should face reality. I stood up from the table, leaving my half-eaten dinner behind. Thank you all for opening my eyes. This has been very enlightening. Mom looked confused. Maya, where are you going? We haven't had dessert yet. I think I need some time to process all of this valuable feedback, I said, pulling on my coat. Thank you for the dinner, Mom. It was delicious as always. I walked toward the front door, hearing the murmur of confused voices behind me. They'd expected tears, arguments, maybe even grateful acceptance of their advice. Instead, I was leaving with dignity intact, which clearly wasn't part of their script. David called after me. Maya, don't be dramatic, we're trying to help you. I turned back at the door, keys in hand. I know exactly what you're trying to do, David. And you know what? It worked. I drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, my mind completely clear for the first time in months. Their words should have hurt, and maybe on some level they did, but mostly I felt relieved. The pretense was over. I didn't have to keep playing the role of the struggling family member who needed their concern and advice. My phone buzzed with texts as I pulled into my parking space. Mom asking if I was okay, Jessica wondering if she'd said something wrong, David sending a message that managed to be condescending, even an apology. I turned off my phone without responding to any of them. My apartment was small by their standards, but it was exactly what I wanted. Clean lines, Minimal furniture, everything carefully chosen and perfectly maintained. I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than David spent on groceries in a week and sat by the window overlooking the city lights. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant returning to the business of running my portfolio of companies. I had a board meeting for the fitness studios, a strategy session with the restaurant management team, and a conference call with potential investors for the tech startup. I had decisions to make that would affect dozens of employees and impact millions in revenue. But tonight, I was just the family failure who'd finally admitted defeat. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my assistant, Rebecca. We needed to accelerate the timeline on several projects I'd been developing slowly. The sustainable clothing brand was ready for its major retail launch. The tech startup needed a larger investment round to scale properly. And there was one particular acquisition I'd been considering that would require moving quickly and decisively. David worked for Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized company that provided software services to small and medium businesses. It was exactly the kind of company I'd been watching, profitable but poorly managed, with enormous potential if someone knew how to unlock it. The current CEO was nearing retirement, and there had been rumors about a sale for months. I'd done my research, of course. Pinnacle was undervalued by at least 30%, carrying debt that could be easily restructured, and sitting on intellectual property that they weren't properly monetizing. With the right leadership and strategic direction, it could be worth 3 times its current market value within 2 years. More importantly, David had spent the last few months bragging about his relationship with the CEO, Marcus Webb. Apparently, Webb had taken David under his wing, mentoring him and hinting about bigger opportunities within the company. David saw it as his pathway to executive leadership, the validation he'd been seeking his entire career. I finished my wine and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, and I had a feeling that my family's perception of failure was about to be dramatically recalibrated. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit and my favorite heels, the ones that added 3 inches to my height and made me feel invincible. I had lunch scheduled with my investment banker, coffee with my lawyer, and a very interesting phone call with Marcus Webb that had been arranged through mutual connections in the industry. By Wednesday, the preliminary paperwork was in motion. By Friday, I had a handshake agreement that would make me the majority shareholder, an incoming CEO of Pinnacle Solutions, pending board approval and due diligence. The transition would be announced the following week, with my official start date set for the 1st of the month. I hadn't spoken to my family since Sunday's dinner, despite increasingly desperate messages from all of them. Mom wanted to know if I was eating properly. Jessica felt terrible about how the evening had ended. David sent a long text about how families should support each other, even when the truth was hard to hear. I let them stew in their concern while I prepared for the most satisfying Monday morning meeting of my life. Because in exactly 4 days, David would walk into his office expecting another routine week of middle management drudgery, and instead he'd discover that his biggest failure of a sister was now his boss. The weekend passed quietly, with me reviewing personnel files and financial reports, preparing for my new role with the thoroughness that had built my success over the past 15 years. Pinnacle was even better positioned than I'd initially thought, with several untapped revenue streams and a talented workforce that had been underutilized by conservative leadership. David's file was particularly interesting reading. Solid performance reviews, good relationships with clients, but no real innovation or strategic thinking. He was exactly the kind of employee who thrived in middle management but would struggle with larger responsibilities. Not someone you'd fire, but not someone you'd promote to executive level either. Sunday evening, I finally returned my mother's calls. "Maya, sweetheart, I've been so worried about you," she said immediately. "You left so abruptly last week, and then you haven't answered any of our messages." "I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I'm better than fine. I took everyone's advice to heart, and I'm making some major changes in my life." "Oh, that's wonderful." Her relief was audible. "What kind of changes?" "You'll see soon enough," I said. "But I want you to know that Sunday's dinner was exactly what I needed to hear. Sometimes it takes the people who love you most to help you see the truth." We talked for a few more minutes, with Mom expressing her hope that I was finally ready to settle down and make practical choices. I assured her that I was definitely ready to embrace reality, which seemed to make her very happy. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of October in the city. I drove to Pinnacle's offices in downtown, using the executive parking space that came with my new position. The building was modern glass and steel, the kind of place that projected success and stability. I'd been here once before for preliminary meetings, but today felt completely different. Marcus Webb met me in the lobby at exactly 9 o'clock, looking every inch the distinguished CEO, with his silver hair and expensive suit. We'd built a good rapport over the past week, and he seemed genuinely excited about the transition. "Maya, welcome to your first official day," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I have to say, I'm impressed by how quickly you pulled this together. The board is thrilled to have someone with your track record taking over." We rode the elevator to the executive floor, discussing the day's schedule and the announcement that would be made to all staff at 10 o'clock. Department heads had been briefed over the weekend, but the general employee population still didn't know about the change in leadership. "There is one employee I should mention," Marcus said as we walked toward my new office. "David Chen in sales. Excellent worker, very dedicated, but he's been asking a lot of questions about advancement opportunities lately. I've been mentoring him informally, but between you and me, I think he overestimates his potential for executive-level responsibility." I nodded thoughtfully. "I'll make sure to evaluate all the staff fairly based on their performance and capabilities." Marcus smiled. "I'm sure you will. You know, it's interesting. He has the same last name as you. Any chance you're related?" "It's a common name," I said, which was technically true even if it wasn't the whole truth. My office was everything I'd hoped for. Corner location with floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant furniture, and a view of the city that stretched for miles. I spent the first hour reviewing final paperwork and preparing for the staff announcement, while Rebecca fielded calls and managed the logistics of my transition from external consultant to internal leadership. At exactly 10 o'clock, Marcus called the all-hands meeting in the main conference room. The entire staff, nearly 200 people, crowded into the space and the adjacent overflow areas. I could see David near the back, looking slightly confused about why everyone had been called together on such short notice. Marcus took the podium and began with the usual pleasantries about company performance and future opportunities. Then he got to the heart of the matter. "As many of you know, I'll be retiring at the end of this year after 15 wonderful years leading this company. Today I'm excited to announce that we've found the perfect person to guide Pinnacle into its next phase of growth and success." I could see David straightening up, his face showing the kind of hopeful attention that suggested he thought this might be his moment. Several other department heads looked similarly expectant. "Please join me in welcoming our new CEO, Maya Chen, who brings extensive experience in strategic business development and has an impressive track record of growing companies across multiple industries." The applause was polite and professional, the kind of response you'd expect when introducing someone most people had never heard of. I stood up from my seat in the front row and walked to the podium, aware that every eye in the room was on me. But I was only looking at one face in the crowd. David's expression had gone through several rapid changes. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a pale, sick realization that his world had just been turned completely upside down. "Thank you, Marcus, and thank you all for the warm welcome," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "I'm thrilled to be joining the Pinnacle family and working with such a talented team to build on the strong foundation that's already been established here." I outlined my vision for the company's future, discussing expansion opportunities, new market segments, and the innovative approaches we'd be implementing over the coming months. I talked about my commitment to employee development and recognition, about creating advancement opportunities for people who demonstrated real leadership potential and strategic thinking. Through it all, I could see David in my peripheral vision, still frozen in place while the people around him whispered and pointed. Word was clearly spreading through the crowd that the new CEO shared his last name, and people were putting together the obvious connection. After the meeting, employees filed out in small groups, buzzing with excitement about the changes ahead. Department heads approached to introduce themselves and schedule individual meetings. Through it all, David remained rooted to his spot near the back wall, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. Finally, when the room had mostly cleared, he approached the front where I was still talking with Marcus and a few senior managers. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Chen, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Marcus looked between us with interest. "David, this is actually perfect timing. Maya, this is David Chen, the sales team member I was telling you about earlier. David, Maya is going to be evaluating all of our personnel for potential advancement opportunities." David's face went even paler, if that was possible. "Yes, sir. I'm very interested in discussing my future with the company." I smiled professionally. "Of course, David. Rebecca can schedule some time for us to talk later this week. I'm looking forward to learning more about your contributions to the team." He nodded mutely and walked away, leaving Marcus looking slightly puzzled by the strange interaction. "Interesting fellow," Marcus commented. "Very ambitious, but that exchange seemed a bit off somehow." "People react differently to change," I said diplomatically. "I'm sure he'll adjust to the new leadership structure just fine." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, introductions, and strategic discussions. I was settling into my new office around 5 o'clock when Rebecca announced that David Chen was outside, asking if I had a few minutes to speak with him. "Send him in," I said, closing my laptop and folding my hands on the desk. David entered like he was walking to his own execution, closing the door behind him and standing awkwardly in front of my desk. Up close, the shock was even more apparent. His face was pale, his hands were shaking slightly, and he looked like he hadn't slept since the morning announcement. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily, staring at me like I was a mirage that might disappear if he blinked too hard. "Maya," he finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "What the hell is going on?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm the new CEO of Pinnacle Solutions, as announced this morning. Is there something specific about the transition you'd like to discuss?" He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was frustrated or confused. "This is insane. How are you the CEO of my company? Last week you were a failed consultant who couldn't afford a house." "Was I?" I asked mildly. "Or was that just what you assumed based on limited information? Don't play games with me, Maya. How did this happen? How are you suddenly in charge of everything?" I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the polished surface to him. It was elegant, simple design, with my name and title, Maya Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Pinnacle Solutions. "I'm not suddenly anything, David. I've been building toward this for 15 years. The same 15 years you've been calling me a failure." He picked up the card with trembling fingers, staring at it like it contained the secrets of the universe. "But your apartment, your car, the way you dress. What about them? You live like you're broke." I smiled. "I live like someone who understands the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth. You've spent so much time focused on showing people what you have that you never stopped to build anything real underneath it all." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of assumptions, judgments, and misunderstandings. David looked around my office, taking in the expensive furniture, the awards on the wall, the view that probably cost more per month than his mortgage payment. "The family doesn't know, do they?" he finally asked. "They know what they've chosen to see," I replied. "The same thing you've chosen to see." He was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of his miscalculation. "Maya, I need this job. Jess and I just bought that house. We have payments, obligations. And you'll keep your job, David, as long as you perform well and contribute to the team's success." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you. I know I said some things last week that were true," I finished. "You said what you really thought about me, about my life, about my choices. That was actually very valuable information." He winced. "I was drinking, and I was frustrated about my own career, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. "Do you know what the interesting thing is, David? Everything you said about me being a failure, it could have been true. I've taken enormous risks over the years. I've bet everything on myself repeatedly, and there were plenty of times when it could have all fallen apart. I turned back to face him. But I kept going because I believed in something bigger than what other people could see. And every time someone told me I was wasting my time or chasing impossible dreams, it just made me more determined to prove them wrong. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I really am sorry, Maya. I had no idea about any of this. I know you didn't. That was the point. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it briefly. It was from Jessica. David told me about your new job. We're so excited for you. Can we take you to dinner to celebrate? I showed him the message. Word travels fast. He looked embarrassed. I called Jess from the parking lot. I was so shocked I needed to tell someone. And what did you tell her? That my sister is apparently some kind of business genius who's been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. I sat back down, studying his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. It was a start. David, I want you to understand something. I didn't take this position to humiliate you or to get revenge for last week's dinner. I took it because it's the right move for my career and for this company. He nodded quickly. Of course, I would never think. But, I continued, I also want you to understand that actions have consequences. The way you've treated me, the assumptions you've made, the things you've said, all of that matters. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not just your sister anymore, David. I'm your boss. And that means our relationship has fundamentally changed. He swallowed hard. What does that mean for my career here? I considered the question carefully. It means you'll be evaluated like every other employee, based on your performance, your attitude, and your potential for growth. No special treatment because we're related, no additional protection because of family loyalty. That's fair, he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Is it? Because last week you seemed to think that family loyalty meant I should accept being called a failure without consequences. He winced again. Maya, I really am sorry about that. I know it was wrong. I picked up a file from my desk, his personnel record, which I'd been reviewing earlier. Your performance reviews are generally positive. Your clients like you, your sales numbers are solid, and you seem to work well with your immediate team. Hope flickered in his eyes. However, I continued, there are some concerns about your leadership potential. Multiple supervisors have noted that you tend to blame external factors when things don't go your way, and you sometimes struggle with adapting to new strategies or approaches. The hope dimmed considerably. Marcus mentioned that you've been asking about advancement opportunities. Tell me about your long-term goals with the company. David straightened up, clearly trying to project confidence. I'd like to move into management, eventually work my way up to a director or VP level position. I think I have a lot to offer in terms of strategic thinking and team leadership. I made a note in his file, strategic thinking, that's interesting. Can you give me an example of a strategic initiative you've proposed or implemented in your current role? He was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling to come up with an answer. Well, I've made suggestions about improving our client outreach methods. What kind of suggestions? More personalized follow-up calls? Better tracking of client preferences? That sort of thing. I nodded. Those are good tactical improvements, but they're not really strategic thinking. Strategy involves looking at the bigger picture, identifying market opportunities, developing long-term competitive advantages. His face fell. I see what you mean. David, I'm going to be honest with you because we're family, even though that has to take a back seat to business considerations now. You're a good employee, but you're not executive material, at least not yet. What would it take? He asked quietly. I appreciated that he was asking instead of arguing. It would take developing skills you don't currently have, learning to see beyond your immediate responsibilities, understanding how your work fits into broader business objectives, taking initiative instead of waiting for direction. I can do that, maybe, but it would also require acknowledging that you don't know everything, that there are people around you, including your sister, who might have insights worth listening to. He nodded, looking genuinely chastened. I'm going to make you an offer, David. I'll create a development plan for you, with specific goals and milestones. If you meet those objectives over the next year, we can discuss expanded responsibilities. But if you fall short, or if you let family dynamics interfere with your professional performance, your future here will be limited. I'll take it, he said immediately. Think about it first. This won't be easy, and I won't give you special treatment. If anything, I'll probably hold you to higher standards, because I know what you're capable of when you're not making excuses. He stood up, looking more composed than when he'd entered. Maya, I know I have a lot to make up for. Not just with work, but with how I've treated you over the years. Yes, you do. I'd like to try, if you'll let me. I studied his face, looking for signs of the old arrogance or entitlement. What I saw instead was someone who'd been forced to confront the gap between his self-perception and reality, and who was genuinely shaken by the experience. We'll see, I said finally. Actions matter more than words, David. Show me who you really are when you're not trying to prove you're better than someone else. After he left, I sat in my office as the sun set over the city, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 days ago, I'd been the family failure eating pot roast in silence while everyone dissected my shortcomings. Tonight, I was the CEO of a company that employed nearly 200 people and generated millions in annual revenue. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed my mother's number. Maya, sweetheart, she said as soon as I answered. David told us the most amazing news. Is it true that you're the CEO of his company? It's true, Mom. But how? When? Why didn't you tell us? I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the growing darkness. Would you have believed me if I had told you? She was quiet for a moment. I suppose we might have had some questions. You had plenty of questions anyway. You just assumed you already knew the answers. Maya, I feel terrible about last week's dinner. The things David said, the way we all acted. You acted like yourselves, Mom. That's what made it so enlightening. Can you forgive us? Can we start over? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness was possible, but starting over implied returning to the same dynamic that had created the problem in the first place. We can move forward, Mom. But things are going to be different now. I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am just to make other people comfortable. Of course not. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you were special. I almost laughed at that revision of history, but there was no point in arguing. People would remember what they needed to remember, and forget what they needed to forget. I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. We talked for a few more minutes, with her asking questions about the company and my plans for the future. I gave her general answers, enough to satisfy her curiosity without revealing the full scope of my business empire. That conversation could wait for another day. After hanging up, I gathered my things and prepared to leave the office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the ongoing process of proving myself to a company full of people who didn't know what I was capable of. But tonight, I was going home to my small apartment with its carefully chosen furniture and its view of the city lights. I was going to pour myself a glass of excellent wine and reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming so successful that your critics have no choice but to call you Madam CEO and watch their assumptions crumble in the face of reality. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I smiled at my reflection in the polished metal. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But today had been perfect. The first month as CEO of Pinnacle Solutions revealed layers of dysfunction I hadn't anticipated from my external analysis. Marcus Webb had been a competent leader, but he'd also been cautious to a fault, leaving money on the table and allowing talented employees to stagnate in roles that didn't challenge them. The company was profitable, yes, but it was operating at maybe 60% of its potential. I spent my early weeks in one-on-one meetings with department heads, reviewing financial reports, and conducting what I called reality audits of our various divisions. What I discovered was both frustrating and exciting. Frustrating because of the missed opportunities, exciting because of how quickly we could turn things around with the right strategic moves. The marketing department was particularly interesting. Led by a woman named Sarah Martinez, they'd been operating with a budget that was laughably small for a company our size. Sarah had been asking for increased resources for 2 years, but Marcus had always deferred the decision, claiming they needed to see better results before investing more money. It was classic circular logic. They couldn't get better results without better resources. But they couldn't get better resources without better results. Sarah, I said during our third meeting, I want you to forget everything you've been told about budget constraints. If you could design the ideal marketing strategy for this company, what would it look like? Her eyes lit up in a way that told me she'd been waiting years for someone to ask that question. She pulled out a folder that was clearly well-worn from being presented and represented to uninterested executives. I've been tracking our competitors' digital presence, and we're falling behind in every measurable category, she began, spreading charts and graphs across my conference table. Our social media engagement is minimal, our content marketing is practically non-existent, and we're not leveraging any of the automation tools that could triple our lead generation. I studied her analysis, impressed by the thoroughness and clarity of her research. What would you need to implement this strategy? A team of 6 instead of 3. Updated software licenses and a budget increase of about 40%, she said, then quickly added. But I know that's probably not realistic given current constraints. Why isn't it realistic? She looked confused by the question. Well, Mr. Webb always said we needed to prove our value before expanding resources. I'm not Mr. Webb, I said simply. Show me the projected ROI on this investment. What followed was one of the most energizing conversations I'd had since taking over the company. Sarah had done her homework, projected conservative growth scenarios, and identified specific metrics we could use to track success. By the end of our meeting, I'd approved her full budget request and given her permission to start hiring immediately. Ms. Chen, she said as she gathered her materials, I have to ask, why are you willing to take this risk when previous leadership wasn't? I considered how to explain the fundamental philosophical difference between growth-oriented thinking and scarcity-minded management. Sarah, this company generates enough revenue to support strategic investments. The previous leadership was so focused on protecting what we had that they forgot we could build something bigger. You've shown me the research, you've done the planning, and you're asking for resources that align with our revenue capacity. That's not a risk. That's smart business. Similar conversations were happening across every department. Our IT infrastructure was outdated because Marcus had been putting off necessary upgrades for years. Our customer service team was understaffed, leading to slower response times and lower satisfaction scores. Our sales process relied on manual tracking systems that should have been automated years ago. Each problem I identified represented an opportunity to improve efficiency, increase revenue, or enhance our competitive position. More importantly, each solution I implemented demonstrated to the staff that we were finally serious about growth instead of just maintenance. David's adjustment to the new reality was fascinating to watch. For the first few weeks, he seemed to be walking on eggshells, treating every interaction like a potential trap. He'd arrive early, stay late, and approach even routine tasks with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for high-stakes presentations. His colleagues were clearly aware of our family connection, and I could see them watching our interactions for signs of favoritism or conflict. David seemed equally aware of the scrutiny, which actually worked in his favor. He couldn't afford to coast on assumed family protection, because everyone was waiting to see how I'd handle the situation. The development plan I'd created for him was genuinely challenging. I'd assigned him to work with Sarah Martinez on a cross-departmental project that would require him to think beyond his traditional sales role. The goal was to identify opportunities for better integration between sales and marketing, with specific emphasis on improving lead quality and conversion rates. I need you to approach this like a business consultant, I told him during our first project meeting. Don't just think about what would make your job easier. Think about what would make the entire customer acquisition process more effective. He nodded seriously, taking notes like a diligent student. It was a striking contrast to the confident, slightly condescending brother who'd lectured me about reality just weeks earlier. The project forced him to analyze data, conduct interviews with team members from other departments, and present strategic recommendations to senior leadership. None of these were skills he'd needed in his previous role, which had focused mainly on relationship management and closing deals that other people had initiated. 3 weeks into the project, he requested a meeting to discuss his preliminary findings. I was curious to see how he'd approach the analytical challenges I'd given him. I've been looking at our lead generation process, he began, settling into the chair across from my desk with a folder of documents. And I think I've identified some significant inefficiencies. For the next 20 minutes, he walked me through his analysis with a level of detail and strategic thinking I'd never seen from him before. He'd identified bottlenecks in our follow-up procedures, gaps in our customer data collection, and opportunities to improve communication between sales and marketing teams. "David, this is excellent work," I said when he finished his presentation. "These recommendations could genuinely improve our conversion rates." His face lit up with the kind of pride I remembered from our childhood, back when earning genuine recognition meant something to him. "Really?" I wasn't sure if I was approaching it correctly. "You approached it exactly right. You looked at the problem from multiple angles, gathered data to support your conclusions, and developed actionable solutions. That's strategic thinking. It's actually been kind of exciting," he admitted. "I've never had the chance to dig into the bigger picture like this before." That comment revealed something important about his previous frustrations. David had been stuck in a role that utilized maybe half of his intellectual capacity, which had led to the kind of restless dissatisfaction that often gets misdirected at other people. Giving him more challenging work wasn't just good for the company, it was addressing the root cause of some of his attitude problems. "I want you to present these findings to the senior leadership team next week," I told him. "Sarah will be there to discuss the marketing implications, but I want you to lead the sales analysis portion." His eyes widened. "To the senior team? Are you sure that's appropriate given our relationship?" I appreciated that he was thinking about potential conflicts of interest. "David, your analysis stands on its own merit. If anyone questions your findings, they'll do it based on the data and logic, not on family dynamics. That's exactly how it should be." The senior leadership presentation went better than I'd expected. David was nervous, which actually worked in his favor because it made him more focused and precise in his delivery. The recommendations were well received, and several department heads asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest in implementation. After the meeting, Sarah Martinez approached me with a smile. "Your brother did excellent work on this project." I have to admit, I was skeptical about the cross-departmental collaboration, but he really understood the marketing side of the equation. "He's learning," I said diplomatically. "Would you be open to making this kind of cross-departmental project work a regular part of our process? I think there are other areas where sales and marketing could collaborate more effectively." I made a note to explore that suggestion further. One of the most satisfying aspects of leadership was discovering that solving one problem often revealed opportunities to solve others. The changes I was implementing at Pinnacle were starting to generate noticeable results. Our response time to new leads improved by 30% after we upgraded our CRM system. Customer satisfaction scores increased as we expanded the support team and implemented new training protocols. The marketing budget increase was already showing returns in the form of higher quality leads and improved brand recognition. More importantly, I could see the cultural shift happening among the staff. People were starting to believe that growth was possible, that their ideas mattered, and that the company was serious about competing at a higher level. There's an energy that comes with that kind of organizational confidence, and it was becoming palpable in our daily operations. My personal life was also evolving in unexpected ways. The family dinners that had been sources of stress for years were now completely different experiences. Instead of defensive explanations about my career choices, I found myself fielding questions about business strategy and industry trends. "Maya, what do you think about all these companies moving to remote work?" Dad asked during our first dinner since the Pinnacle announcement. "Do you think it's sustainable long-term?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than skeptical challenge, which was a refreshing change. We spent the next hour discussing workforce trends, productivity metrics, and the balance between flexibility and accountability. Jessica seemed genuinely interested in my perspective on entrepreneurship, asking about the challenges of building multiple businesses and managing complex portfolios. "I've been thinking about starting my own marketing consultancy," she admitted. "Do you think there's room in the market for someone with my background?" I gave her honest feedback about the competitive landscape and suggested some strategies for differentiating her services. It was the kind of substantive conversation I'd wanted to have with my family for years, and it was happening because they now saw me as someone worth listening to. David was the most dramatically changed in his interactions with me. The casual dismissiveness was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine respect. He asked thoughtful questions about leadership challenges and seemed genuinely interested in learning from my experiences. "Can I ask you something?" he said one evening as we walked to our cars after dinner. How did you know that Pinnacle was the right acquisition target? It was a sophisticated question that showed he was thinking about business strategy in ways he never had before. I explained the research process, the financial analysis, and the strategic considerations that had made Pinnacle attractive. I never realized how much work went into evaluating a company, he said. I always thought business decisions were more instinctive than analytical. Both matter, I told him. You need the data to understand what's possible, but you also need intuition to recognize opportunities that others might miss. Mom was perhaps the most awkward in adjusting to the new dynamic. She kept oscillating between pride in my success and embarrassment about how she'd treated me previously. During one particularly uncomfortable moment, she started apologizing again for the comments she'd made about my life choices. Mom, we don't need to keep revisiting the past, I told her. What matters is how we move forward. But I feel so terrible about the things I said, she insisted. About you being too sensitive. About needing to find a real job. I had no idea what you were building. You had no idea because I chose not to share it with you, I said gently. That was my decision, and it was based on my assessment of how the information would be received. She looked confused. What do you mean, Mom? If I had told you 3 months ago that I was planning to buy a company and become a CEO, what would your reaction have been? She was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about the question seriously. I probably would have been worried, she admitted. I would have thought you were taking on too much risk. Exactly. So I waited until the risk was eliminated and the success was undeniable. That protected both of us from unnecessary stress and conflict. It was a diplomatic way of explaining that I'd learned not to trust my family with vulnerable information, but she seemed to understand the underlying message. The most unexpected change in my family relationships came from my father. He'd always been the quietest member of our dinner gatherings, content to let others dominate the conversation while he observed from the sidelines. But my new status seemed to have unlocked something in him that I'd never seen before. Maya, I owe you an apology, he said one evening as the family was cleaning up after dinner. Not just for last month, but for years of not paying attention to what you were accomplishing. I was surprised by the directness of his statement. Dad rarely addressed emotional topics head-on. I got comfortable thinking of you as the family member who needed help and guidance, he continued. It was easier than recognizing that you'd grown beyond anything I could teach you. Dad, you don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. Because while I was dismissing your achievements, you were building something that put you in a position to help all of us if we ever needed it. That kind of generosity deserves respect, not condescension. The conversation revealed something I hadn't fully understood about the family dynamic. My success hadn't just challenged their assumptions about me, it had forced them to reconsider their own choices and achievements. Dad's comment about being in a position to help them suggested he'd been thinking about financial security in ways that my previous struggles had made irrelevant. Are you worried about retirement? I asked, genuinely curious about what had prompted his reflection. He nodded slowly. Your mother and I have been talking about it more seriously lately. We're in decent shape, but not great shape. And watching you build multiple income streams has made me realize how limited our planning has been. It was the first time anyone in my family had asked for my perspective on financial strategy, and I found myself genuinely excited to help. We spent the next hour discussing investment options, risk management, and the importance of diversifying beyond traditional retirement accounts. Would you be willing to look at our portfolio sometime? He asked as the conversation wound down. I'd value your opinion on whether we're positioned well for the next phase. I agreed immediately, pleased by the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to their financial security. It felt like a complete reversal of the traditional family dynamic, where I'd always been seen as the one who needed guidance and support. The changes at Pinnacle were accelerating beyond my initial projections. The marketing investments were generating leads at twice the rate we'd anticipated. The IT upgrades had improved operational efficiency to the point where we were handling 20% more client work with the same staffing levels. Customer satisfaction scores had reached the highest levels in company history. More importantly, we were starting to attract attention from larger clients who had previously viewed us as too small for their needs. 3 Fortune 500 companies had reached out to discuss potential partnerships, and 2 major industry publications had contacted us about featuring our growth story. Maya, I have to ask, Marcus said during one of our transition meetings, how did you know these changes would work so quickly? I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I've never seen results like this from operational improvements. It was a fair question, and the answer revealed something important about the difference between maintenance-focused leadership and growth-focused strategy. Marcus, you built a solid foundation, I told him. The company was profitable, the client relationships were strong, and the staff was competent. But you were managing the business like you were trying to preserve something fragile, instead of building something powerful. What do you mean? Every decision you made was about minimizing risk rather than maximizing opportunity. That approach works when you're in survival mode, but it limits growth when you're in a position to compete more aggressively. I pulled up a presentation I'd been working on that compared our pre-acquisition metrics with our current performance across multiple categories. Look at these numbers, I continued, pointing to the charts. Revenue per employee is up 18%. Customer acquisition cost is down 12%. Client retention has improved to 94%. These improvements weren't the result of revolutionary changes. They came from optimizing systems that were already in place but underutilized. Marcus studied the data with the kind of attention that suggested he was genuinely learning from the analysis. I see what you mean. I was so focused on not losing what we had that I wasn't thinking about what we could gain. It's a common trap for successful leaders, I said diplomatically. Success can make you conservative, especially when you're approaching retirement and want to preserve your legacy. The conversation reinforced my belief that leadership transitions often fail because the incoming leader tries to completely replace the previous approach instead of building on its strengths while addressing its limitations. Marcus had created a stable, profitable company with good client relationships and competent staff. My job was to take those assets and leverage them more aggressively, not to tear down everything he'd built and start over. David's development was progressing faster than I'd expected. The cross-departmental project had revealed analytical skills that his previous role had never required, and he was showing genuine enthusiasm for strategic thinking. More importantly, his attitude toward feedback had completely changed. Maya, I've been thinking about the customer retention analysis we discussed, he said during one of our weekly check-ins. I think there might be an opportunity to improve our follow-up process with clients who haven't purchased additional services. He outlined a systematic approach to identifying dormant accounts and re-engaging them with targeted offers based on their previous purchase history. The strategy was sophisticated, data-driven, and potentially lucrative. David, this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that could advance your career, I told him. Have you discussed this with your direct supervisor? Not yet. I wanted to run it by you first to make sure I wasn't missing anything obvious. I appreciated that he was seeking input rather than charging ahead with incomplete analysis, but I also didn't want him to become dependent on my guidance for every decision. Your analysis is solid, I said, but I want you to present this to your supervisor as your own initiative. Don't mention that we discussed it. Take credit for the work you've done. He looked uncertain. Are you sure that's appropriate? I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to circumvent the chain of command. David, you are circumventing the chain of command by running everything by me first. Your direct supervisor should be the first person to see your strategic recommendations, not the last. It was a subtle but important point about professional development. I wanted him to succeed, but I also wanted him to build confidence in his own judgment and learn to navigate organizational dynamics independently. The conversation highlighted one of the unexpected challenges of managing a family member. In trying to help him succeed, I risked creating a dependency that would ultimately limit his growth. The most effective support I could provide was encouraging him to trust his own analysis and take ownership of his contributions. 3 months into my tenure as CEO, Pinnacle Solutions was performing at levels that exceeded even my optimistic projections. We'd increased revenue by 22%, expanded our client base by 15%, and improved profit margins through operational efficiencies. The industry publications that had initially reached out for growth stories were now featuring us as a case study in successful leadership transitions. More satisfying than the financial results was the cultural transformation within the company. Staff meetings had evolved from status updates to strategic discussions. Department heads were proposing initiatives instead of waiting for direction. Employees at all levels were contributing ideas for improvement and taking ownership of outcomes. "I've never seen morale this high," Sarah Martinez told me during one of our monthly reviews. "People actually look forward to coming to work now. There's a sense that we're building something important, instead of just maintaining the status quo." That observation captured something essential about effective leadership. Financial performance was important, but sustainable success required creating an environment where talented people could do their best work and feel valued for their contributions. The family dynamics had settled into a new equilibrium that felt both strange and refreshing. Instead of the defensive conversations about my career choices, dinners now featured discussions about industry trends, business strategy, and economic analysis. My parents asked for my opinions on everything from investment decisions to career advice for their friends' children. David had evolved into something closer to a genuine colleague than a skeptical brother. Our professional interactions were respectful and productive, while our personal conversations had gained depth and mutual respect that had been missing for years. "Can I tell you something?" he said one evening as we walked to our cars after a family dinner. "I've learned more about business in the past 3 months than I did in the previous 5 years." "That's because you're being challenged in new ways," I replied. "Your previous role didn't require strategic thinking, so those skills never developed." "It's more than that, though. Working for someone I respect has made me want to perform at a higher level. I never realized how much leadership quality affects employee motivation." The comment revealed something important about his previous frustrations. He'd been capable of more sophisticated work all along, but the organizational culture hadn't encouraged or rewarded that kind of contribution. "David, that insight about leadership and motivation, that's the kind of strategic thinking that could make you valuable in any organization." He smiled. "I'm starting to understand why you've been so successful. You see possibilities that other people miss." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected ways that professional success had transformed my personal relationships. The family members who had dismissed my ambitions were now seeking my guidance. The brother who had called me a failure was developing into a genuinely strategic thinker. The parents who had worried about my unconventional choices were now proud of the leadership role I'd achieved. But perhaps most importantly, I had finally stopped needing their validation to feel confident in my choices. The success at Pinnacle was satisfying not because it proved my family wrong, but because it demonstrated the value of persistence, strategic thinking, and the courage to pursue goals that others couldn't envision. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after taking control of Pinnacle Solutions, I was standing in a boardroom overlooking downtown, watching David present a comprehensive market expansion strategy to our biggest potential client. The transformation was remarkable. The same person who had once dismissed my ambitions with casual cruelty was now articulating complex business concepts with confidence and precision. The client, Henderson Industries, was exactly the kind of account that could elevate Pinnacle from a mid-sized player to a major force in our industry. Their CEO, Patricia Williams, had flown in from Chicago specifically for this presentation, bringing with her a team of executives who controlled a technology budget worth $15 million annually. "Our analysis indicates that your current software infrastructure is creating significant inefficiencies in your supply chain management," David was saying, his voice steady, as he clicked through detailed slides. "We've identified 4 critical bottlenecks that are costing your organization approximately $2.3 million in lost productivity each year." I watched Patricia's face as she absorbed the information. She was the kind of executive who had built her reputation on making data-driven decisions, and David's presentation was hitting exactly the right notes. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, working late nights to master the technical details and rehearsing his delivery until it was flawless. "These projections assume a 12-month implementation timeline," Patricia said, leaning forward with obvious interest. "Can you guarantee those results?" David glanced at me briefly before responding. "We're confident enough in our analysis to offer performance guarantees tied to specific metrics. If we don't deliver the projected efficiency improvements within 18 months, we'll refund 20% of the implementation costs. It was a bold offer, one we debated extensively during our preparation meetings. Offering financial guarantees was risky, but it demonstrated the kind of confidence that major clients expected from their technology partners. Patricia smiled for the first time during the presentation. Mr. Chen, that's exactly the kind of commitment we're looking for. When can we begin the implementation process? The contract we signed that afternoon was worth $2 million over 3 years, making it the largest deal in Pinnacle's history. More importantly, it established us as a serious contender for enterprise-level clients who had previously viewed us as too small for their needs. Maya, I can't believe we actually landed Henderson Industries, David said as we rode the elevator down from the client meeting. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined presenting to executives at that level. You earned it, I told him. That presentation was professional, thorough, and persuasive. Patricia Williams didn't sign because you're my brother. She signed because you convinced her we could solve her problems. The success with Henderson Industries created a ripple effect that transformed Pinnacle's market position almost overnight. Word spread quickly through industry networks that we were capable of handling complex enterprise implementations. Within 2 weeks, we had inquiries from 3 other Fortune 500 companies, each representing potential contracts worth millions. The rapid growth created new challenges that tested every aspect of our organization. We needed to hire specialized talent quickly, expand our technical capabilities, and develop project management systems that could handle multiple large-scale implementations simultaneously. The comfortable, mid-sized company culture was evolving into something more complex and demanding. Maya, we need to talk about capacity, Sarah Martinez said during one of our weekly strategy meetings. We've got more opportunities than we can realistically handle with our current staffing levels. She was right. The marketing investments had been so successful that we were generating leads faster than our delivery teams could process them. It was a good problem to have, but it was still a problem that required immediate attention. What are our options? I asked, pulling up our resource allocation spreadsheets. We can either turn down some of the smaller opportunities to focus on the enterprise clients, or we can accelerate our hiring timeline and risk overextending ourselves financially. It was the kind of strategic decision that would define Pinnacle's trajectory for years to come. Conservative growth would protect our cash flow and minimize risk, but it might also limit our ability to establish ourselves as a major player in the market. Sarah, I want you to model 3 scenarios, I said. Conservative growth with our current capacity, moderate expansion with targeted hiring, and aggressive growth with full-scale hiring. Include projected revenues, costs, and cash flow implications for each approach. The analysis she delivered 3 days later confirmed what I'd suspected. Conservative growth would generate steady profits but leave money on the table. Aggressive growth could potentially double our revenue within 18 months, but it would require significant upfront investment and carry substantial risk if any major contracts fell through. The moderate expansion scenario offered the best balance of opportunity and security. We would hire strategically for specialized roles, focus on our highest value opportunities, and build capacity gradually to support sustainable growth. Let's proceed with the moderate expansion plan, I decided. But I want weekly reviews of our cash flow and capacity utilization. If we start seeing problems, we'll adjust immediately. The hiring process revealed another unexpected benefit of our recent success. Talented professionals were now seeking us out instead of the other way around. Our reputation for innovation and growth had attracted attention from consultants, project managers, and technical specialists who wanted to be part of a dynamic organization. One particularly impressive candidate was Marcus Rivera, a former director at a major consulting firm who had managed implementations for clients similar to Henderson Industries. During his interview, he asked thoughtful questions about our growth strategy and made suggestions that demonstrated deep industry knowledge. Marcus, why are you interested in joining a company that's significantly smaller than your previous employer? I asked. Because you're moving in the right direction, he replied. Large consulting firms are bureaucratic and slow to adapt. You've created an environment where good ideas can be implemented quickly and where individual contributions actually matter. His assessment of our competitive advantages was remarkably accurate. We were indeed more agile than larger competitors, more willing to take calculated risks, and better at providing personalized service to our clients. What concerns do you have about our growth trajectory? I asked, curious about his perspective on our strategic challenges. My only concern is whether you can maintain your current culture as you scale, he said. Growth often creates complexity that slows decision-making and reduces flexibility. The key is building systems that support expansion without eliminating the qualities that made you successful in the first place. I offered him the position immediately. Anyone who could articulate our strategic challenges that clearly would be valuable in helping us navigate them successfully. The expansion was proceeding smoothly when an unexpected complication emerged from an entirely different direction. Jessica called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "Maya, I need to ask you for a huge favor," she said without preamble. "David's been offered a position with another company, and we don't know what to do." I was surprised by the news, but not entirely shocked. David's performance at Pinnacle had attracted attention from industry recruiters, and his success with the Henderson Industries deal had raised his profile considerably. "What kind of position?" I asked. "Senior Director of Business Development at TechFlow Systems." "It's a significant promotion with a substantial salary increase, but he's worried about leaving Pinnacle right now." TechFlow Systems was one of our competitors, a well-established company with a reputation for aggressive expansion and high employee turnover. The offer probably represented a genuine advancement opportunity for David, but it would also create complications for both of us. "Has he discussed this with his direct supervisor?" I asked. "No, he wanted to talk to you first. He's afraid it might look like he's being disloyal after everything you've done for him." The situation was delicate for several reasons. From a business perspective, losing David at this point would be inconvenient, but not catastrophic. From a family perspective, I didn't want him to feel trapped at Pinnacle because of our relationship. "Jessica, tell David to schedule a meeting with me tomorrow afternoon. We need to discuss this professionally, not through family channels." The meeting the next day was one of the most honest conversations David and I had ever had. He laid out the details of the TechFlow offer with complete transparency, including the salary increase, benefits package, and growth opportunities. "Maya, I need you to know that I'm not looking to leave Pinnacle," he said. "This opportunity came to me through a recruiter, and it's significantly better than anything I ever thought I could achieve. David, let me ask you a direct question. If I weren't your sister, would you be having second thoughts about this offer?" He considered the question carefully. "Probably not. It's objectively a better opportunity in terms of compensation and career advancement." "Then you should take it," I said without hesitation. His surprise was obvious. "Are you sure? I know the timing isn't ideal with all the expansion we're planning." "The timing is actually perfect. You've proven yourself at Pinnacle, demonstrated strategic thinking abilities, and earned recognition in the industry. This offer validates everything you've accomplished over the past 6 months." I meant every word. David's growth during his time at Pinnacle had been remarkable, and he deserved opportunities that would continue challenging him. Trying to keep him at Pinnacle for sentimental or family reasons would ultimately limit his potential. "What about the Henderson Industries account?" he asked. "I feel responsible for seeing that implementation through to completion." "Marcus Rivera can take over the Henderson account," I assured him. "He has more experience with enterprise implementations, and it will be a good way for him to establish relationships with our most important client." The transition proceeded smoothly over the following month. David worked closely with Marcus to transfer all client relationships and project knowledge. He maintained his professional standards right up to his last day, ensuring that Pinnacle's reputation remained intact despite the personnel change. His farewell lunch with the team was surprisingly emotional. Colleagues who had initially viewed him with skepticism because of our family connection now spoke genuinely about his contributions and wished him success in his new role. David really earned everyone's respect. Sarah Martinez told me after the lunch, "I have to admit I was worried about nepotism when you first started developing his strategic skills. But he proved himself through performance, not politics." The comment highlighted something important about the way we'd managed the family dynamic in a professional setting. By holding David to high standards and requiring him to demonstrate competence independently, we'd avoided the usual pitfalls of working with relatives. 3 weeks after David's departure, I received a call from Patricia Williams at Henderson Industries. The implementation was proceeding ahead of schedule, and they were already seeing measurable improvements in their supply chain efficiency. "Maya, I have to tell you that Marcus Rivera is exceptional," she said. "His technical expertise is exactly what we needed, and his project management skills are keeping everything on track." The successful transition validated my decision to support David's career move. He was thriving in his new role at TechFlow Systems, Pinnacle was continuing to grow with strong leadership in place, and everyone involved had benefited from prioritizing professional development over personal relationships. The Henderson Industries success story became a powerful marketing tool for attracting other enterprise clients. We leveraged the case study in proposals, used Patricia Williams as a reference for prospective customers, and positioned ourselves as specialists in large-scale technology transformations. By the end of my first year as CEO, Pinnacle Solutions had doubled its revenue, expanded its staff by 60%, and established itself as a legitimate competitor to much larger firms. The industry publications that had initially covered our growth story were now featuring us in articles about innovative business strategies and effective leadership transitions. The personal satisfaction of building something significant was matched by the professional recognition from peers and competitors. I'd been invited to speak at industry conferences, serve on advisory boards, and contribute to discussions about future trends in business technology. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, my predecessor as CEO, called me on the anniversary of my appointment with congratulations and reflections on the company's transformation. "Maya, I have to admit that I underestimated what you could accomplish," he said. "I thought I was leaving you a solid company, but you've turned it into something extraordinary." "Marcus, you did leave me a solid company," I replied. "Everything we've built has been on the foundation you created. The difference is that we've been willing to take risks and pursue opportunities that require more aggressive investment." "That's exactly what this company needed," he said. "I was too conservative in my later years, too focused on preserving what we had instead of building what we could become." The conversation reminded me that successful leadership often requires different approaches at different stages of an organization's development. Marcus had been exactly the right leader for Pinnacle during its early growth phase, while I was better suited for the aggressive expansion phase we were now experiencing. As I sat in my office that evening, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on the year's achievements, I realized that the most important transformation hadn't been professional or financial. It had been personal. I'd finally stopped defining myself in opposition to other people's expectations and started building something that reflected my own vision of success. The family member they'd once dismissed as a failure was now running a company that employed nearly 300 people and generated tens of millions in annual revenue. But more importantly, I'd created an organization where talented people could do meaningful work, where innovation was rewarded, and where strategic thinking was valued over political maneuvering. The sweetest revenge, it turned out, wasn't proving them wrong about my potential. It was discovering that their opinions had never mattered as much as I'd once believed. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in late spring, 18 months after I'd taken over Pinnacle Solutions. I was reviewing quarterly financial reports when Rebecca announced that Patricia Williams from Henderson Industries was on the line, and she sounded urgent. "Maya, we have a situation," Patricia said without her usual pleasantries. "TechFlow Systems just pitched us on a complete system overhaul that would essentially replace everything we implemented with you. They're claiming our current setup is outdated and inefficient." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. TechFlow is David's new company, and this felt like more than coincidence. What specifically are they proposing? A complete replacement of our supply chain management system, new customer relationship software, and what they're calling, quote, next-generation analytics platforms. The proposal is very professional, very detailed, and honestly quite compelling. "Patricia, can you send me their proposal? I'd like to review their recommendations before we discuss response strategies." "Already on its way to your email," she said. "Maya, I need you to know that we value our relationship with Pinnacle enormously. The improvements we've seen over the past year have exceeded every projection. But if there are genuinely better solutions available, We have a fiduciary responsibility to consider them. After hanging up, I immediately pulled up the TechFlow proposal. It was comprehensive, professionally prepared, and strategically devastating. They had identified legitimate areas where our implementation could be improved, proposed solutions that would genuinely add value, and structured the pricing to make the transition appear cost-effective over a 3-year timeline. More concerning was the level of detail about Henderson's current systems and operational challenges. This wasn't generic competitive intelligence. Someone had provided TechFlow with insider knowledge about our clients' specific needs and pain points. Marcus Rivera knocked on my office door 20 minutes later, his face grim. "Maya, I just got off the phone with my contact in Henderson's IT department. TechFlow's proposal addresses issues that weren't even in their original RFP. Someone gave them information that should have been confidential." "How confidential?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Information that only someone who worked on our implementation would have known. Details about their database architecture, their workflow bottlenecks, their long-term technology roadmap." The implications were clear and deeply troubling. David had left Pinnacle with comprehensive knowledge of our largest client systems and challenges. TechFlow was using that information to undermine our relationship and steal our most valuable account. "Marcus, I need you to prepare a detailed response to their proposal. Point-by-point analysis of their recommendations, cost-benefit comparisons, and objective assessments of whether their solutions would actually improve Henderson's operations." "Are you going to address the ethics issue?" he asked carefully. It was a fair question that highlighted the complexity of the situation. Confronting David directly would create family drama and might not resolve the business problem. Ignoring the ethical breach would signal to our team that competitive intelligence theft was acceptable behavior. "I'm going to focus on demonstrating that our solutions are superior," I said. "If TechFlow wants to compete on information they obtained through questionable means, we'll compete on results and integrity." The next week was intensive preparation for what felt like a battle for Pinnacle's reputation and future. We assembled a team of our best technical specialists, financial analysts, and project managers to develop a comprehensive response to TechFlow's challenge. The analysis revealed something interesting. While TechFlow's proposal was impressive in scope and presentation, many of their recommendations were based on outdated assumptions about Henderson's business priorities. The information David had provided was accurate as of 6 months ago, but Henderson's strategic focus had evolved significantly since then. Their customer analytics proposal assumes Henderson is still prioritizing market expansion, Sarah Martinez observed during one of our strategy sessions. But Patricia told me last month that they're shifting focus to operational efficiency and cost reduction. That's exactly the kind of strategic misalignment that happens when you're working from old intelligence instead of current client relationships, Marcus added. We structured our response around 3 key arguments. First, that continuity and integration were more valuable than disruption and replacement. Second, that our ongoing relationship gave us superior insights into Henderson's evolving needs. Third, that the total cost of switching systems would far exceed any projected benefits from TechFlow's solutions. The presentation to Henderson's executive team was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Patricia had insisted on a formal comparison process, with both Pinnacle and TechFlow making presentations to the same decision-making group. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes competitive situation that could define a company's trajectory. I arrived at Henderson's offices 30 minutes early, using the time to review my notes and mentally prepare for what would likely be an intense confrontation. The conference room was set up like a courtroom, with presentation equipment at the front and a long table where Henderson's executives would sit in judgment. TechFlow's team arrived precisely on time, led by their senior partner Janet Morrison, whom I recognized from industry conferences. She was accompanied by a project manager and a technical specialist, along with David, who avoided making eye contact as they filed into the room. "Good morning, Maya," he said quietly as we passed in the hallway. "I hope you know this isn't personal." "Of course it's personal, David," I replied evenly. "But it's also professional, which makes it worse." Patricia Williams called the meeting to order with characteristic efficiency. "We're here today to evaluate 2 competing proposals for upgrading our technology infrastructure. Each team will have 45 minutes for presentation, followed by 15 minutes of questions. Pinnacle Solutions will present first. Our presentation focused on evolution rather than revolution. We demonstrated how our current systems could be enhanced and expanded to meet Henderson's changing needs, emphasized the value of preserving their existing data and workflows, and presented a timeline that would minimize disruption to their operations. The system we implemented 18 months ago has delivered every promised benefit and exceeded performance targets in multiple areas, I concluded. Rather than starting over with unproven solutions, we recommend building on the foundation that's already generating measurable value for your organization. The questions from Henderson's team were thorough and technical, covering everything from scalability concerns to long-term maintenance costs. Our preparation paid off. We had detailed answers for every inquiry and could demonstrate deep understanding of their business requirements. TechFlow's presentation was polished and persuasive, emphasizing innovation, cutting-edge technology, and transformational change. Janet Morrison was an excellent presenter who made their solutions sound both exciting and essential. Henderson Industries deserves better than incremental improvements to outdated systems, she argued. Our comprehensive platform will position you for the next decade of growth and competition. But as the presentation continued, I noticed subtle signs that their intelligence was indeed outdated. They proposed solutions for challenges that Henderson had already resolved, emphasized capabilities that weren't aligned with current priorities, and made assumptions about budget allocations that were no longer accurate. During the question period, Patricia asked about integration with their new customer service platform, a system they'd implemented just 3 months earlier. TechFlow's response was generic and nonspecific, clearly indicating they weren't aware of the recent changes. Our platform is designed to integrate seamlessly with all major customer service systems, Janet said, which was the kind of non-answer that sophisticated clients immediately recognize. What about Supply Chain Pro 3.0? Patricia pressed. We implemented it in February, and integration capabilities are critical for our decision. There was a brief pause before David spoke up. We'll need to conduct additional analysis of that specific system to provide detailed integration specifications. It was exactly the wrong answer. Henderson had clearly expected both companies to be fully informed about their current technology environment, and TechFlow's knowledge gap was now obvious to everyone in the room. After both presentations concluded, Patricia thanked the teams and indicated that Henderson would make their decision within a week. The handshakes were polite but perfunctory, and I could see disappointment in Janet Morrison's face as she realized their information advantage hadn't been as valuable as expected. David lingered in the conference room as the other participants filed out. Maya, can we talk privately for a minute? I nodded, curious about what he wanted to say. I need you to know that I didn't seek out this opportunity, he began. Janet Morrison approached me about Henderson Industries. She knew I had worked on the implementation. David, what you did or didn't seek out isn't the issue. The issue is that you provided confidential client information to a competitor. I provided general insights about technology challenges that are common across the industry, he said defensively. You provided specific details about Henderson's database architecture, workflow processes, and strategic priorities. That's not general industry knowledge. That's proprietary information you obtained while representing Pinnacle. He was quiet for a moment, clearly understanding the ethical implications for the first time. I didn't think about it that way. Janet framed it as sharing expertise about technology solutions. David, you're smarter than that. You knew exactly what information would give TechFlow a competitive advantage, and you provided it anyway. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait for Henderson's decision, I said. If they choose TechFlow despite the ethics issues, that's their prerogative. But if they choose us, I expect TechFlow to honor the decision and stop using confidential information to undermine our client relationships. The decision came 3 days later. Patricia Williams called personally to inform me that Henderson Industries would be continuing their partnership with Pinnacle Solutions. Maya, your presentation demonstrated exactly why we chose to work with you in the first place, she said. You understand our business, you stay current with our changing needs, and you provide solutions based on real insight rather than generic recommendations. What about TechFlow's proposal? I asked. Impressive from a technical standpoint, but ultimately not aligned with our actual requirements. Their assumptions about our priorities were outdated, and their lack of awareness about our recent system changes raised questions about their attention to detail. After hanging up, I felt a complex mixture of relief, satisfaction, and disappointment. Relief that we'd retained our most valuable client. Satisfaction that integrity and expertise had prevailed over insider information and aggressive tactics. Disappointment that David had compromised his professional ethics for competitive advantage. The victory at Henderson Industries sent a clear message throughout the industry. Pinnacle solutions couldn't be easily undermined through intelligence theft or aggressive poaching tactics. We competed on merit, maintained ethical standards, and delivered results that spoke for themselves. More importantly, the incident forced me to establish clear protocols for protecting confidential client information and managing competitive intelligence. We implemented stricter non-disclosure agreements, enhanced security procedures, and training programs that emphasized ethical behavior in competitive situations. Maya, this experience has made our entire team more aware of information security, Marcus Rivera observed during our quarterly review. Everyone understands that client confidentiality isn't just a legal requirement, it's a competitive advantage that we need to protect. The Henderson Industries retention became a powerful reference point for other enterprise clients. Word spread quickly that we had successfully defended our largest account against aggressive competitive pressure, which actually strengthened our reputation for reliability and expertise. 2 weeks after Henderson's decision, I received an unexpected email from David. It was formal, professional, and surprisingly thoughtful. Maya, I wanted to apologize for my role in the Henderson Industries situation. You were right that I crossed ethical boundaries, and I should have declined to participate in TechFlow's competitive analysis. I've learned from this experience and will be more careful about maintaining confidentiality in future situations. I hope this incident won't permanently damage our professional relationship or our family connection. I appreciated the acknowledgement, even though it came after the consequences were already clear. David was learning that professional success required more than technical competence and strategic thinking. It also demanded ethical judgment and integrity under pressure. The incident with TechFlow and David marked a turning point in how I approached both business competition and family relationships. I realized that maintaining high standards sometimes meant accepting that people you care about might make choices that disappoint you, but that those disappointments didn't have to define the relationship permanently. Professional success had given me the confidence to set boundaries, maintain standards, and compete on my own terms. The family member who had once called me a failure had learned that success without integrity was ultimately hollow, while the CEO he'd tried to undermine had demonstrated that principled leadership could prevail against questionable tactics. The sweetest victory wasn't proving David wrong, it was showing him, and myself, that doing the right thing was often the most effective business strategy. 2 years after that humiliating family dinner, I stood at the podium of the Regional Business Excellence Awards, accepting recognition as CEO of the Year. The audience of 300 industry leaders gave me a standing ovation as I held the crystal trophy that symbolized everything my family had once believed I'd never achieve. Success isn't about proving people wrong, I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. It's about staying true to your vision when everyone else can only see limitations. In the audience, I spotted familiar faces from my journey. Patricia Williams from Henderson Industries, beaming with pride at our continued partnership. Sarah Martinez, now Vice President of Strategic Development, wiping away tears of joy. Marcus Rivera, who had become my most trusted advisor, applauding enthusiastically. And there, at a table near the back, sat my entire family. Mom, Dad, Jessica, and David, all dressed in their finest clothes, all looking at me with expressions I'd never seen before. It wasn't just pride or surprise. It was genuine respect, the kind that comes from finally understanding someone you'd underestimated for decades. The transformation had been complete, but not in the way I'd originally imagined. David had eventually left TechFlow to start his own consulting firm, applying the strategic thinking skills he'd developed at Pinnacle, with a new commitment to ethical practices. He'd called me for advice during his startup phase, and I'd been genuinely happy to help him succeed on his own terms. Jessica had indeed launched her marketing consultancy, using connections and insights from our family conversations to build a thriving business. She now spoke about entrepreneurship with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for criticizing my unconventional choices. Mom and Dad had implemented the financial strategies we discussed, significantly improving their retirement security. More importantly, they'd learned to see business success as something to celebrate, rather than something to worry about. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in our family dinners. The monthly gatherings had evolved into genuine strategy sessions where we shared challenges, celebrated victories, and supported each other's ambitions. The defensive conversations about my career choices had been replaced by collaborative discussions about market opportunities and business strategies. "Maya, I have something to tell you," Dad said during dinner the week after the awards ceremony. "I've been bragging about you to everyone at the golf club. Frank asked me to give you his card. His insurance company needs a technology consultant." It was a perfect circle. The same Frank whose office manager position had once been suggested as a more suitable career path for me was now seeking my expertise for his own business challenges. Standing in my corner office overlooking the city, I reflected on the journey from family failure to industry leader. Pinnacle Solutions now employed over 400 people across 3 locations. My investment portfolio had expanded to include 12 companies in various industries. The business magazines that once ignored my achievements now featured me on their covers. But the real victory wasn't the financial success or professional recognition. It was the quiet confidence that came from building something meaningful on my own terms, without compromise or apology. The family who had once dismissed my dreams now sought my guidance. The brother who had called me a complete failure now introduced me as his mentor and inspiration. The parents who had worried about my unconventional choices now celebrated the very qualities they'd once questioned. That evening, as I prepared for another family dinner, I smiled at the memory of that pivotal October night when everything had changed. They'd given me a choice: accept their assessment of my failures or prove them wrong through action. I'd chosen action, and in doing so, had discovered that the most powerful response to doubt isn't argument or explanation. It's excellence, achieved with integrity and sustained through perseverance. The girl they'd once pitied for her impossible dreams had become the woman they now admired for making those dreams reality. And the sweetest part of all wasn't their changed opinion of me. It was my complete independence from needing their approval in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.